Imagine building something from nothing, starting with a garage, a dream, and a friend, growing it into a billion-dollar company, changing the way the entire world thinks about technology. Then, being asked to leave. Not by a competitor, not by the market, by the very people you hired to help you. This is not fiction. This happened to Steve Jobs in 1985, at 30 years old. And what he did next changed everything. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak launched Apple Computer from a suburban California garage. Jobs was 21 years old. By 23, he was a millionaire. By 25, Apple was worth over $1 billion. Then Jobs did something that would change his life forever. He hired someone to manage the company he had built, a man named John Sculley, president of PepsiCo. Jobs convinced him to leave the soft drink giant with one of the most famous lines in business history. Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water to children, or do you want a chance to change the world? Sculley said yes, and Jobs handed him the keys. That decision would cost Jobs everything. By 1985, Apple's flagship products were struggling. The Lisa, the early Macintosh, both underperforming. Tensions between Jobs and Sculley exploded into open war. Jobs tried to stage a boardroom coup to remove Sculley. The plan leaked. The board sided with Sculley. Jobs was stripped of his responsibilities. They gave him an office with no team, no product, no power. He described it as Siberia. A few months later, the man who co-founded Apple submitted his resignation letter. He was 30 years old, and he was out. Jobs himself later said at Stanford University, "I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating." Think about that for a moment. The man who would one day be called the greatest CEO of all time described himself as a very public failure. But here is what the world does not talk about enough. Jobs did not collapse. He did not disappear. He did not spend the next decade bitter and resentful. He started over. Within months of leaving Apple, he founded a new company called Next, a computer platform targeting higher education and business. It was ambitious, it was unconventional, and commercially, it struggled. Then he did something even more unexpected. He bought a tiny division from a film company called Lucasfilm, a computer graphics unit that almost nobody believed in. He renamed it Pixar. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated feature film in history. It was a global phenomenon. This is lesson 1. The fall is not the end. It is the redirection. When you lose the job, when the relationship ends, when the business fails, you do not lose your ability to build. You lose one vehicle, not your engine. Jobs lost Apple, but he kept building. And while he was building something else, he became someone else. Someone better. Someone ready. The 11 years Jobs spent away from Apple were not wasted years. They were forging years. At Next, he learned operations at a deeper level than he ever had at Apple. He learned what it meant to run a company without the safety net of early success. He learned humility. He learned patience. He learned that vision without execution is just a hallucination. At Pixar, he learned storytelling. He learned how creativity and commerce could coexist. He learned how to lead world-class talent without crushing them. The man who returned to Apple in 1997 was not the same man who left in 1985. He was sharper, more focused, more self-aware. His former colleagues described him as having a new, easier-to-work-with attitude. This is lesson 2. Your wilderness season is your MBA. Most people treat a setback like a waiting room, just passing time until things get back to normal. The extraordinary ones treat it like a training ground. What are you learning in your wilderness right now? What skill are you building? What character flaw are you sanding down? Because the version of you that emerges on the other side is the version the world has been waiting for. By 1996, Apple was in serious trouble. Microsoft's Windows was dominating the market. Apple's stock had collapsed. The company was burning through cash. Analysts were openly asking whether Apple would survive. Then Apple made a desperate move. It acquired Next, Jobs' struggling computer company, for $429 million. Officially, it was a technology deal. But everyone knew what it really was. They were buying Steve Jobs back. In 1997, after the board removed its CEO for poor performance, Jobs was named interim CEO. He walked back into the company he had built and found it drifting, bloated and confused. His first move? He replaced the entire board of directors. He cut Apple's product line from dozens of models down to 4. He killed everything that was not essential. Then he called Bill Gates, his arch rival, and convinced Microsoft to invest $150 million in Apple. The crowd at Macworld booed when Gates appeared on screen, but Jobs did not care what the crowd thought. He needed Apple to survive. He did what was necessary. This is lesson 3. Ego is the enemy of the comeback. The Jobs who left Apple in 1985 would never have called Bill Gates. He would have been too proud, too competitive, too blinded by the rivalry. The Jobs who came back in 1997 had one goal: win. And he was willing to do whatever it took, even partner with his enemy to achieve it. How many times has your pride cost you an opportunity? How many doors have you refused to walk through because of who was holding it open? The comeback requires you to be strategic, not sentimental. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac, colorful, elegant, like nothing the world had ever seen. It saved the company. In 2001, the iPod. In 2003, iTunes. In 2007, the iPhone. The same man who had been publicly humiliated, the same man they called uncontrollable, erratic, and difficult. That man built the most valuable company in human history. Before he died in 2011, Jobs reflected on his firing. He said it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because the pain was not real, but because the pain forced a transformation that success never could have. This is the final lesson. Sometimes you have to be removed to be refined. The fire does not destroy you. It burns away everything that was holding you back. The version of you that survives the fire is the version that was always supposed to lead. 4 lessons from the greatest comeback story in business history. 1. The fall is not the end. It is the redirection. 2. Your wilderness season is your MBA. Use it. 3. Ego is the enemy of the comeback. Stay strategic. 4. Sometimes you have to be removed to be refined. You may have been fired, pushed out, overlooked, underestimated. You may have failed in public, lost everything you worked for. But you are still here, and the story is not over. The world's greatest comeback is still ahead of you. This is big win mentality. Keep winning.